grant writing, what grants are, grant writing, and then the administration things involved. And I myself have written and administered almost up to $1.5 to $2 million worth of grants, so I have a little bit of experience. I like to define things before I talk about them, and I looked this up and I couldn't find any definition anywhere for a grant, so I made it my own. And they're basically funds given by a grantee, by somebody, to a qualifying organization, such as the Colonial Dames, for a specific scope of work, and that SOW is grant lingo, and you may see it again throughout the presentation, that usually requires some sort of reporting criteria. And grant periods are usually 1 to 2 years in a general sense. Now, there are different types of grants. There are government grants, and then there are private grants, and under that you have foundations and funds like Scott mentioned, the IMLS or the AASLH, National Endowment for Humanities. I work mostly with state grants. That's where most of my experience is. And these types of grants, Florida's pretty generous in their historic preservation funding. I'm not sure about each of y'all's particular states, but in Florida, the grant is usually written 2 years before you will actually receive the funds. So you really need a strategic plan in place, like you've heard a couple of the speakers talk about, and know what your needs are going to be 2 or 3 years down the road. So typically you write the grant, the next year you go before the Florida Historic Commission, and they score you and rank you, and then the next year you get the money. So that it does take some long-range planning for them. Now, grants often require a match, and this can get a little confusing sometimes, but you can match the money. Say you're getting $100,000. Sometimes they want a 100% cash match. They want the Dames to put $100,000, and then you're asking for $100,000. Sometimes it's 20/80 or 25/75. It can be any kind of combination of that. Then you can also use volunteer labor to go towards that match, but you have to be real careful with that, because it can't be, oh, some ladies help guide, so we're going to use their hours to match money we're asking to raise the roof, or something like that. The volunteer labor has to be the same as the scope of work. Say you wrote a grant to paint the woodwork in the building. Well, if some of you ladies wanted to come paint the woodwork, you could actually use that as volunteer labor towards your match. And also I have up there materials. If some of you donated the paint, that could be counted as a match. But you always have to make sure everything matches up just right. Right now I have one grant that does not require a match, and I have another grant that requires 100%. I have a $50,000 state grant that the Dames are putting up $50,000. Now I have another grant I wrote for 2 years from now for $350,000, and we need $175 to match. So we're doing some fundraising, like Karen was talking about, to kind of help us meet that match. Okay. Whoops. Oh no. Oops. Go back to, is it going back? There we go. Now, on your tables, I know those Excel sheets look really scary and small print, but the one with the smallest print has a list of some of the grants we've had at the Jimenez Facio House, and I've written some of them. Marcy's actually written a few of them. Our president's writing one now, but I generally handle the state grants. And since 2004, we've gotten 20 different grants. So some special category grants, those are state grants that Florida offers that are up to $350,000. The small matching grants are $50,000. General operating support are usually smaller grants, and they're not offering those right now. We did get a National Save America's Treasure grant, which which was really great. And has another property gotten one of those?
Yes.
Three.
Georgia,
Georgia, Connecticut, and Kentucky have also gotten those. Unfortunately, they no longer have that program. And then the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund is one that we have as a resource in Florida. So you can see we've gotten a lot of money, so it's a lot of work, but it can be well worth your while. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about how to prepare, find your grant, and write your grant. And you really need to go through these 5 steps before you actually start writing. You want to define what your project is. You don't want to just say, let's go get a grant. I think Karen had said that. You don't want the tail to wag the dog. You want to have, and then you have to have a specific project in mind of what you want to write for. You need to attach a number to all the elements of that project, prepare a budget and a time schedule. Then you need to find people that will give you money, and you want to choose the right one for your project. Then you're ready to start writing the grant. So I'm going to talk about each of these 5 things now in a little bit more detail. So define your project. I've put a list up there of some of the different kinds of projects that there is funding for out there. I do a lot with bricks and mortar restoration projects. I have condition assessment report up at the top. If you're going to do a bricks and mortar project, I highly recommend first get a grant to hire a consultant to give you a condition assessment report on your building. That way you've got a plan from the beginning. You're not going to waste any money. You're not going to, you know, fix the walls and then next year, oh, you're going to do the electricity, so you have to tear the walls down that you just fixed. So you want to get a condition assessment report. I highly recommend that. Then there are operating support grants, archaeology, you know, you can see the list there. So once you know, get your project defined, which one of those things are you going to do? Oh, I just keep hitting the wrong button. Okay, next you want to prepare a budget for that project and a time schedule. The people that you're asking the money from are going to want this anyway, but you need to do this for yourself. And sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out what things are going to cost, but you have to just give it your best guess. And I have an example. I wrote for technical support. We wanted new laptop and some software. We wanted to get on Past Perfect, which I'm sure, do y'all use Past Perfect? A lot of you for your collections. Good. Well, this was when I wanted to get that. And so first I did everything I would need. And you know, you always need more things than you think you're going to need. Then I made my estimated cost. And then as I went through the grant period over that year, I just filled in what I actually spent. And you can see down at my subtotal, I had not spent the full $5,000 yet that I asked for. And our Jacksonville office, they needed a new computer too. So I was able to add that in for that amount and go towards that. So budgeting is a little tricky, like I said, but just try to think everything through. Okay. This thing doesn't like me. Okay. Now, projects, cost, and time. There's another spreadsheet. It's got a little bit bigger writing, and I gave that out. That's an example of a grant I'm doing now. And it gives you I know it looks scary, there's a lot of lines, but if you're actually writing a grant, you need to do this out. You have to put everything you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how much it's going to cost. And if it's a matching grant, and in my example it was, I just figured out ahead of time what we were paying, what the grant was paying, and it makes it a lot easier when you go to do your report. So what you want to do is break your project components, you know, into your reporting periods. Generally, you report every 3 months or every 6 months on your project. And like I said, give each project a number, and just add it all up and make sure that your total equals the amount of money you're asking for. Or generally make it a little less. And when you're doing this budget, really figure out the most something is going to cost to kind of help you, because you don't want to go over your budget, or else you're not going to be able to get as many things as you wanted to. Okay, next. There. Okay, now we need to find people to give us money. That's the tricky part. What you want to do, first of all, within the society, ask around, people know things, ask people from different states. Go ahead and do an internet search if you don't have any ideas or you're trying to look for something new. The National Endowments for the Arts, NEH, IMLS, search the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Sometimes your state would have, like the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation has grants. And look in your state's Division of Historical Resources website and see what they have. I mean, you can just type in, say you want to do a new education exhibit center, which we're about to do. Just type in museum exhibition grants. I mean, you'll never know what you'll come up with. And it is a little time consuming, but eventually you'll find people that want to fund these things. And then you want to choose who wants to support your project. You have to look at your project. Say you want to write a new educational brochure. You want to pick one of the grantees that is an important project for them to fund. So don't go to somebody that wants to help students get supplies. I mean, you want to really match up what you want to do with what they want to give money for. And, use keywords. A lot of people like to give for education, and you can kind of spin your project. Everything we do is educational, pretty much. And so you can kind of use that word a lot. And I'll talk about that next in writing the grant. Now, I don't have this up here, but using keywords and telling them what they want to hear are important. But following directions. Everybody say that with me. Follow directions. You would be surprised when they ask a question, they want to know the answer to that question. Sometimes these grant applications are this big. Now, if any of y'all were on a grant review committee, would you want to read through all that? I mean, you want to find your answers quickly and as easily as possible. So be sure, follow directions. What they ask for, give them that answer. Use key words in your answers and tell them what they want to hear. For example, if your project's for restoration and the grantee likes to give to restoration, just keep using that word restoration in your grant application. If your project's for restoration and the grantee wants to give for education, then just talk about how the restoration will educate people, kind of like that. And then if the grantee likes to hear about public and minorities, because a lot of these state grants, that's really important to them, just write about how your project is going to benefit the public and minorities. So just writing that way really, really will help you be successful. Okay, right one this time. There. I actually cut and paste words from the application questions, and I start my answer with them. I use them in my answer. I put them in bold. That way, when the person's reading the grant, they can see that I gave them the information that they wanted. Remember, follow the directions. And I have a couple of more hints. That Excel sheet I showed you in the beginning, the budget, if you do that ahead of time, that will really help you clearly write your grant and say exactly what you want to do. some websites show grants that were previously written, so don't reinvent the wheel. Just copy the way they did it. So, you know, you can look some of those up. And this is the big thing. Call them up. Talk to them a lot. I know with this state, I don't really get to meet a lot of the people personally unless I go over to Tallahassee, but like with the DuPont Fund, we'll, you know, maybe have lunch with them or invite them to the museum. But even if you can't meet them, get to know the receptionist's name, first of all. I mean, write it down on the front of your folder. And she is the gatekeeper a lot of times. And then find out who the person is that's going to be, once your grant gets going, who they're going to be, and talk to them. When you're writing the application, if you have a question about, gosh, what's the best way to answer this question, call them up. Say, who's my person? It's Bob. Okay, Bob, I've got this question in here. What do you really want to know here? And that kind of starts a rapport with him. He realizes that you're really trying to work within their framework. So that's always a good thing to do. Then, okay, once you've written the grant and gotten it, then you get to administer it. And that's really a lot of hard work too. There are two parts to grant administration. There's the administration, which is kind of the stuff that you have to give to the grantee that they want to know about. And then there's the project management, which is the manager of the project. I'm the writer, the administrator, and the project manager. And since a lot of you are small, one person might end up doing that. But sometimes it's best if you can get a different person to do each one, or at least have a team that works with that. And as you're doing the work, make sure, you know, I'm always going over to the museum when they're like working on the windows. And I know I wrote the grant to do a certain thing to the windows, and I have to make sure that they're doing that and not doing something else, because when I send in my grant report, I have to show pictures and things, and they won't reimburse me for the things that are not in the scope of work. It's helpful to keep a daily journal of what you're doing with the grant and keep track of your administration task. The reporting can be lengthy, so I always start a folder, like my first quarter report folder. I start that the first day of the grant, and every time I write a check or get an invoice or copy an email or make a phone call, I just copy it and I stick it in that folder. So then when the grant period ends and I have to do the report, I have everything right there all ready. So it's like being in the kitchen, just wash the dishes as you go, and you don't have a big mess at the end. And I have a sheet on the table too, the last handout, which the first half tells what different grant administration duties are involved, and the second part shows costs that relate to project management. And the good thing is, if you need to hire somebody, or if you can't get a volunteer to do this for a whole year intensely, you can write grant administration fees into some grants sometimes. The state allows up to 10%. So sometimes you can write grant administration fees in. But if you look through this sheet, I mean, it's very time consuming. I mean, Karen mentioned a lot of cost involved with fundraising. Just the manpower, keeping track of everything, keeping the calendar, tracking the expenses, making sure everything lines up, keeping a file of correspondence, sending in the reports. Those are just part of the grant administration. And then project management, you have to schedule your architect, you have to make meetings with the architect and contractor, you have to, if it's a bricks and mortar program, if you're like writing a brochure, you have to meet with your brochure writer. I mean, you have to schedule all these things and make time for them. And those are just some of the things, and y'all can take that home with you. And like I mentioned, you can put the things in, and the result, you will have a successful and funded project. So if anybody has any questions. Yes?
There's maybe a misconception that certainly I have, that funds for bricks and mortar projects are just hard to come by. I mean, that
Yes,
no
fun-
grants out there.
Yes, it is hard to find funds for bricks and mortar. People, they don't like to build buildings. They like to see more educational kind of projects out. And I'm lucky that the state of Florida does have bricks and mortar projects. But, you know, like I said, you just have to search and look and find people that do, or just say, you know, our house is our biggest educational project. And you can support the education here in the house by helping us, you know, fix the roof so it doesn't leak, so we can have tours in here, or something like that. But it is hard to find bricks and mortar.
What
Yes.
about operating expenses? How do you sort of pitch that to the money?
Operating. Well, there are actually general operating expenses grants out there that you can do, but that's another thing. People want to give to one thing, one project. It's sexy, you know. It's not sexy to pay the phone bill. So that is, but if you can get grants for the big other things, then you can reallocate your funds into those areas. Anything else there? How many of you have written grants in here? Any of you want to share any of your experiences, good or bad, with those? I know, yes.
Well, I just wanted, I've been,
Yes, I wanted you to say.
I have been prompted to do this.
Okay.
I have a very big professorial voice, so I usually do it. The best advice I ever got for grant writing was to follow the directions.
Thank you.
And I was a reviewer a number of years ago for NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I read grant proposals. And ladies, I can tell you, when you go way off track, no grant reviewer is going to pay any attention to what you have to say.
Yes, and you want those grant reviewers to like your grant. So again, bolding those keywords is good. Yes, Scott?
I'll say in one of my previous lives I was a grant writer. And one thing that I noticed out of it was writing the grants for government. I used an entirely different language than writing the private grants.
Right.
So
Yes.
keep that in mind when you're doing it. Government is very factual, you know, almost I could say government staccato. You need to just hit the point, that's it. They don't want any of the fluffery. They don't want the niceness. They just want it in their face, and that's it.
Little words.
The facts. Get just the facts.
Mm-hmm.
I've written 2 grants for gardens because that's my expertise. And I work as a volunteer with the President Benjamin Harrison Home in Indianapolis. And it was getting to be pretty sad shape with the landscaping. And along came an opportunity through our garden club from the National Council of Garden Clubs and the Petal Project that was sponsored by Shell Oil Company for gardens. So I wrote a project for them, and I used design and measurements and plants and identification and the number of volunteers and how much money our garden club could give to it. And from that, I got $2,500, which more than took care of our project for this small garden. Well, that was pretty successful. That was back in, I think, about 2002. And then in 2005, they asked me to do another one. This is called the Freedom Gardens, which went all the way around the property and was quite a large landscaping project. And we got that one through too. Now when we got our results back from our report, the one thing they said was we'd like to have more pictures. It seemed like pictures were very descriptive, and you can write all you want about what you're going to be doing and what it's going to look like, but if they can see some pictures from the results, that seemed to weigh a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a bit of a unique problem in New York. We've been turned down for grants because they say you have enough in your endowment. You're rich enough over there, you don't need us. And I wondered if anybody else had had that problem and how do you circumvent it, if you can?
Well, sometimes endowments might be for certain things. No, this is.
General endowment.
Hmm.
Maybe they're right, is what you
Yeah, the only thing I would think is if you could come at it from an angle that it was something that the endowment wasn't going to take. Oh, and another thing, like coming from a different angle, we recently were given some funding, but it could only be used for our collection items. And so, and there are grants out there for collection items. Well, I accession the house as our largest collection item. So now I can get a lot of bricks and mortar that way. So you can try that. But for your situation, I'm not sure. Interesting. Hillary.
I hope this never happens to anyone in this room, but for those museums who do not have a development director, somebody who is really watching the fundraising, be careful that everybody on your board and all your volunteers know not to go independently after grants.
Yes.
We had, when I was the president of the opera, we had an opera guild that was so excited about putting on Hansel and Gretel that they went and asked the biggest funder in Oregon to underwrite the cost of Hansel and Gretel. And it worked funded. But it was not within the scope of what the opera was doing that year. And the really horrible part about it is if you have to underline why not to let that happen, is it's very difficult to return grant.
Yeah.
The grantors usually have a specific amount of money that they need to get back. They don't want money back. So I only say with all of the goodwill and all the volunteers that are in the National Society, do coordinate them into a team.
Yes, and again, that's part of your strategic plan, you know, that hopefully everybody knows about and is going by.
I was just thinking about New York's question a little bit, and I know in past discussions, there's sometimes a way in a grant proposal to highlight the investment of the board in
Yes.
your mission, and kind of really obviously, so that they can see, they may be wondering to themselves, well, how much are all of you willing to, if you're not just going for outside money, how much are you yourselves, investing literally dollars in the mission from your
Yes.
site? And I'm sure you are, so it sometimes just has to be like what you think is overly obvious language, just to make the point. We solicit this and they invest in this, and how many volunteer hours the volunteers put in, that kind of thing that really
Right.
bolsters that piece of the proposal.
Exactly. They see your commitment to the project, and that is very important. Well, good. I hope you all go get a lot of money.